Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM's Guild Review, my written and video series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the campaign adventure Dragon Relics, designed by JVC Parry for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This video has been sponsored by the designer. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review, which means I get to actually put out a timely review because Dragon Relics is out today on the DM's Guild. Now, if you missed my preview video, where I did a 5-minute long preview of Dragon Relics, this is a combination of several previously released smaller adventures from the designer that they have combined into one bigger campaign that is along the lines of all the official Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign adventures, so Storm King's Thunder, Tyranny of Dragons, Prince of the Apocalypse, and all those adventures. It's very successful at what it does, and by having all of these separate adventures combined together, it really creates a pretty unique variety of styles, from a hex crawl in the desert to a heist in this theocratic temple to an underground jungle exploration to a murder mystery at an auction house. A lot of really cool separate ideas and themes and mechanics that come together into one overarching campaign, which is really cool and frankly very, very effective. I do have some criticisms about the execution of it, and overall I'm very, very positive on Dragon Relics. I would say that I don't like it as much as Call from the Deep, which was Parry's big campaign that was released, I think it was released last year. I reviewed it last year. And it's not nearly as long either. It actually, although it's a full campaign that goes from level 1 to basically the teens, kind of, standard what the 5th edition campaign adventures do, it actually clocks in at 99 pages, which is very, very short considering it covers that much ground. So it's maybe not quite as much content as you would expect from that big of a campaign, but it also means it's a lot easier to run. It's actually very easy to run. And sometimes you can just appreciate that much less material to have to go through. I do like the setting. We're getting the hell out of the Sword Coast, which is always refreshing, and this takes place in and around the Anarch Desert, which is further to the east, which I didn't realize is actually full of different little biomes within itself. So it's actually a whole icy region to the north, so it's not just desert, but this actually serves as a hex crawl. If you can see, there are actual hexes in here, and there's a whole bunch of random encounters. So I'm going to break down how this campaign works and how I think about it, but overall I'm very positive on it. I do definitely think this was going to go down as one of the stronger releases of 2020, and I really like the idea of combining previously released adventures into a overarching campaign. Obviously, we get a very professional layout and design, a Dramatis Personae, which is very nice at the beginning, this excellent map. We do get some full-color battle grid maps throughout, which is very, very helpful and nice. Thank you so much for that. Table of contents is very helpful. Introduction is amazing. This does a great job of breaking down the entire adventure synopsis, providing content warnings, everything you will need to really know what is going on here. So the entire campaign combines 3 separate adventures: Blood at the Auction, Beneath the Sands, and the Theocracy, which are chapters 3, 4, and 6, I believe. And then it creates kind of its own intro and epilogue to wrap things up together. It actually uses a lot of elements of Storm King's Thunder with the whole, and I guess, yes, because Storm King's Thunder had the Blue Dragon was actually the final, spoilers I guess, was the final boss of that campaign, which is actually the case here, is Raziel, this is ancient Blue Dragon, has returned. And you find out by your poor level 1 heroes, or of course sending it in, waiting for something exciting to happen, as often these campaigns do. And a cloud giant castle crashes a few miles, or actually supposed to be several days away. I would probably make it a little bit closer, make it more exciting, but a little bit closer. You make your way out there, you find the poor cloud giant king, Hrungir, who is fighting for his life against a bunch of lizard folk, and he explains that this horrible blue dragon has recently come back. It's this ancient nemesis, literally an ancient blue dragon. And that spells doom for everybody, and he sends the adventurers off on basically a series of fetch quests, which is what every chapter is. You need to collect the dragon relics pertains to these artifacts that the players need to collect in order to be able to face the dragon, as well as, of course, leveling up and having fun along the way, and the friends we made along the way. So the very first chapter, it's a really cool, inciting incident. I like the inn start, and then you twist that by having a cloud giant castle kind of crash down nearby and have them explore that. There's not actually a whole lot going on in these very early levels. You do start at level 1, but level 1 doesn't even really involve much of a combat. It's like basically just that scene. And then level 2 is just making your way to this ruined palace, which is also just a single encounter and a single scene with Hrungnir. So I was kind of hoping this would at least be more of a dungeon crawl through the ruined palace, because as it is, although I like the way it starts, there's not actually a whole lot of content in chapter 1. And then chapter 2, which you're told you have to fetch a bunch of relics, but the first one you're given before you're given the rest of them, so that there's kind of some leveling and ordering in which you can do things. And unfortunately, the first one is so much further away, so the actual event happens in this general area, if you can see my mouse cursor there, east of the halfway in here, somewhere east of Everesca. And then you're supposed to travel all the way north up to here, the Ruby Holler. And you can see you're basically traversing just about the entire map. And that's basically what you do at level 3. The first half of Chapter 2 is just a hex crawl through the desert. And that's kind of a bummer to do that early. You give them such a cool, inciting incident, and then you kind of bog down with all these random encounters. Now, this does include an extensive, well-done lore. I don't even know what you call that section. It's called in here the Anarch Gazetteer, which is probably the best way to describe it, but because that's how the 5th edition official campaigns do it, where it provides extended notes and details on notable areas of interest. So let's actually skip ahead to that so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, just because this is what Chapter 2 is. Which is here. So it's written like that one chapter in Storm King's Thunder, or a lot of books do this, where they're given all these different subheadings of areas, and then each area has something fun and interesting happening in there. So like I wrote down some notes, and there's an undead gyrosphinx haunting a castle. There's a ghostly city that everybody was killed because of poisoned water from the Zentarum. There's a Zentarum cliffside outpost where they train wyvern mounts. There's numerous oases, including one that was created by a decanter of endless water, guarded by a Marid. There's just a lot of interesting stuff happening in just about every single location on the map if the players want to really go off the beaten path and explore stuff. Or as a DM, if you want to look at this and really expand some of these areas, you can too. So that's a really, really nice part of making the hex crawl more interesting, and as well as, and the critical part is having all of these random encounters here. There's over, I believe, 30 of them. Yeah, over 30 encounters, and this is set up similar to all the ones from the book, like Tomb of Annihilation, or those where you can roll a D100 if you want, and it depends on the region that the players are in. You're supposed to roll a certain amount of times a day on a D20, and then if it's higher than this number, then that means an encounter occurs. Not all these encounters are straight up combat encounters, but most of them are. But I do like that all of them are given their own little paragraph, and they're at least more interesting than just a polar bear attacks. There's a little bit of more things happening in terms of what that creature is, and maybe there's something else going on, and multiple creatures and whatever. So that part's at least good. It's just kind of a bummer that the early levels just don't feel quite as satisfying, especially compared to what this campaign ends up evolving into, which does get a lot more interesting. But from levels 1, 2, and 3, unless you're really into that hex crawl thing, I don't think it's nearly as satisfying. Once you get to level 4, and keep in mind, we're leveling up pretty quick here too. Once you get to level 4, you make it to the Ruby Holler, and this is the first interesting location, which is where the first item is aboard this cool ship in the middle of this frozen wasteland, so it's kind of stuck in the ice. There's a frost giant who's lording over a bunch of orcs, and it's a neat kind of stealthy infiltration, probably devolve into a combat fight, really cool battle map here. And this is the kind of thing that you're really going to get, which is an interesting location, and then interesting stuff going on, which is a lot of what I like about this designers. They make really good dungeons and good setups for just fun things to go down, so I like that a lot. And thankfully, you don't have to travel all the way back down to turn that freaking quest in, the Cloud Giant King manages to get his castle up and running again. So you're immediately given basically the airship upgrade after that, and essentially you're out of tier 1. So unfortunately, although it's a level 1 through, whatever, teens, like 12 or 13 campaign, it's really focusing more on tier 2 and tier 3, as already after the Ruby Hauler, I believe we are leveled up to 5. And, we had, that one dungeon, and it's a fun dungeon, but it's kind of small, and then there's a bunch of random encounters and stuff. So that was all of tier 1 is over, and we're done. And now we've got the airship. We don't even fuck around with random encounters on the ground anymore. We can just plop around on the airship. So, unfortunately, I think it was a bit of a... it fast forwards things a little too much. I would have liked a little bit more content in those early levels. The players are being hunted by some armies of Raziel, which is led by Parzid the Grim. This is one of the few times where the villain is actually doing things, which is another complaint I have on this overarching campaign, and it's very player-focused, and the players are going around doing things, and basically you just don't really interact with the villain until the end. There's one time where the villain sends a copy of himself at you, and it's kind of basically a way for you to prove that your relics are doing good things, but even that is not a super satisfying chapter, and I just wish there would have been more opportunities for example, Prince of the Apocalypse did this very well, where the elemental cults are actually doing things, like they are, releasing these weapons of mass destruction in cities and destroying them, or they're moving people around, and you find them out in the world, and you get a chance to be the hero and see the effects these elemental cults are having in the region, and that makes you feel good about having to stop them. In this case, the impetus is just, hey, an ancient blue dragon running around is bad news, we better go stop them. And there's not really, you never get that personable feel of like, oh shit, this... You're across like a city that's just destroyed by the dragon, or something that made it more of a, we need to be the heroes and actually stop this thing. Otherwise, it's just kind of this, I don't know, it's more of a vague threat that we all agree that, yeah, blue dragons are bad. The one thing it does do is hunt these half-blue dragons after the players specifically, just to try to stop them from taking the relics, but... I think it would have been cool if you had seen more of these agents. Because the problem is, a lot of the villains in a lot of the published 5e books are entire groups. They're cultists, or they're basically almost all cultists, I guess. Whereas in this case, it's basically just the dragon, and then the dragon's got these kind of half-dragon underlings, and they're just going after the players. So there are these rules kind of similar to what we see in Out of the Abyss, where they're being, they can... plus or minus the distance to where these are to the heroes, and the DM, you're supposed to kind of keep track of that. I mean, that's fine that the rules are there, but for me it would be more of a, okay, when is the best time in the story for these, for this to actually catch up and hit the players, if it's been a while since we remind them about the fact that they're, why they're doing this and all that, if they're really going off the beaten path. So I'm glad that that's included on there. I probably wouldn't necessarily use those rules, but I wish there was a bit more of the blue dragon actually, like, causing problems for people around the area, so you feel like, okay, yeah, we need to actually be heroes and stop this threat. After Chapter 2, the players can actually choose which relics they want to go after next between the next two, and they could not be more different in terms of the themes and the gameplay styles that they present. Chapter 3 is an almost entirely role-playing focused murder mystery that takes place in an auction house, because one of the items that you need is owned by this dwarven family. The item is not up for auction at the moment, but then the auctioneer is murdered on the night 2 or something. It's supposed to be a couple days, and the item mysteriously becomes up for sale so that the villain can then acquire it. There's a whole cast of characters. Everybody's got their own hidden secrets that you can try to suss out of them. They've got really detailed notes on their role-playing. There's got some great pictures up here you can use. It seems like a really, really fun opportunity, and something that's really, really different from what D&D normally offers, which is always devolving into combat at some point. There's a side plot that's happening here where there's 2 people that are disguised. There's a Rakshasa in disguise and I think it's a night hag. and they both kind of realize each other are in there for different nefarious reasons, and that fight actually does blow up towards the end, as there's a completely different item thereafter. That's just kind of a red herring for why these ones are kind of lying about who they are. But there's a really good system for actually following the auction, which is fun if your players want to get involved in that and maybe try to win some cool magic items or even just some nice items, as well as figuring out the investigation of the murder mystery. There's a whole crime scene thing. You can obviously talk to all the people. I really, really like this section. I think it's very, very well done and offers something very, very different from what a lot of players are probably used to, and that's an entire chapter, which is fun. And then Chapter 4, again, could not be more different. This one is almost entirely combat and exploration focused, as the players delve into this hidden... There's this gauntlet underneath this city that they go through, which is this map you see here. It's just a gauntlet of traps, which is really very Tomb of Annihilation-y, with all these, like, there's a reverse gravity trap, there's all these things happening. And then once you exit, you actually enter into this, like, Land of the Lost, hidden underground jungle, like Journey to the Center of the Earth style, which is kind of a hex crawl, but maybe not so much. It's more of a, like, here's some areas of interest you can go to, and there's, like, bullywogs up here that worship a Froghemoth in the Black Tar Swamp. You're supposed to take out all 4 of these growth stones because that's a force field protecting the ziggurat, and then you can dismantle the ziggurat, get inside, and it's a big dungeon crawl in there, again, very much full of traps and everything. It just offers a completely different experience from Chapter 3, and it's interesting that you can choose which one to do first. Hopefully they choose the auction house first, because that one doesn't involve much combat, and then you can level up a little bit more for this one, which is very, very combat and trap heavy. So I like the fact that those both focus on very different things, and yet you get to do them basically back to back, which is pretty cool. So I think that's a cool dynamic and a cool change of pace for both adventures being included. This is very much Tomb of Annihilation too, with all the dinosaurs involved and all the traps. Very, very cool. Chapter 5 is a really quick one-page chapter where you're just attacked by a Simulacrum of Raziel. I would have appreciated maybe a different kind of retaliation. Instead of keep hunting the players, maybe a town the players like is attacked, or maybe the Cloud Giant Castle is attacked again. I don't know, something. But this one, this copy is basically can be taken out pretty quickly, provided the players have, the relics, which they do, so not really much consequential. Chapter 6 is based on the Theocracy, which is a adventure I reviewed over 2 years ago, back in 2018. Probably one of the first adventures. I think, when did I start? I think I started maybe late 2017 reviewing DM's Guild adventure, so that's kind of fun. You can go back and look at my review of the Theocracy. I was very positive on it. I thought it was very cool, and it's very cool here. It was scaled down. It was originally a Tier 3 heist dungeon, and here it's been scaled down slightly to where it's made for level 9, so upper Tier 2. But it's still a heist. It's very much meant to have the players infiltrate this very holy place, which is very cool, because usually when you're in a dungeon, it's very, dark and death and evil and all that. In this place, it's very holy and righteous, but it's a twisted kind of holy and righteous. It's very much the, Kalinar would approve, for those of you that watch our D&D games. They're very zealous about Tyr, and they outlaw arcane magic everywhere. They're just bad folks that happen to worship a god of light. So a really, really cool scenario. It's a huge dungeon. There's a lot of really great extensive notes on patrol patterns and the day-night cycles and everything you need to know to properly do a heist. So I think it's very satisfying. And again, a completely different gameplay style, because the heist offers some more stealth and role-playing opportunities, as well as exploration becomes critical, and then combat becomes more of a last resort, but still, something you can do. So I think it offers a lot of really cool gameplay styles. And each one of these areas, you're supposed to be getting an item, and these are actual magic items. And then at the end, once you've collected, I believe there's 4 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, you just basically take the fight to the Blue Dragon. Hrungnir just steers the ship right over there, and your items coalesce into his ancient foe, which these items were made out of his this old, I think it was a bronze dragon that originally attacked, basically was this dragon's rival. And it reduces Raziel's hit points down to a certain amount, and then he flies back into his ziggurat. And it's a really interesting multi-stage boss battle. So you've got the one boss battle where you summon the bronze dragon and they kind of fight each other. And then as you get inside the actual dungeon, which is this map, he's there, he's got reduced hit points, but then he's got these gargoyle statues where as soon as you start attacking the dragon, the gargoyles take damage instead of him. and immediately once that starts, all the gargoyles fly off into the dungeon. So that creates a really awesome situation where even though the dragon's right there and you can attack it, you don't really do damage until you go through all of the gargoyles as hit points worth of damage. Now you could still brute force it if you wanted to, or you could scatter into the dungeon and try to take out those gargoyles. So I think that's a really neat thing. I would definitely describe that very clearly to the players. Like, you slice into the dragon, doesn't show any wounds, but you see that same slice appear in the gargoyle, you know, and then of course having them fly off is just, that's an awesome scenario, and I think that would go over very, very well, especially if the dragon then kind of, you know, flies up and doesn't really engage the players too much, but uses its breath weapon as well as it can. You know, it's a very well designed dungeon. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. Notice how these traps too are given like full page descriptions. Really great job on all of these traps in every single area of the campaign. Traps are given usually multi-stage things where it's like, here on initiative counts these things happen. They're almost all none of these traps are like you spring open a thing and it does damage and you're done. They're all like, okay, this thing is happening, you have to do this, there's this check, here's the following countermeasures you can do, here's the ongoing effects, here's the complications. Just incredible job on the traps, particularly in all of these different areas. And there's a bunch of these kind of traps like that. And unfortunately, there's not much of an actual epilogue. Once you defeat the blue dragon, that's just kind of it. There's this one single paragraph on the outcomes. So many people skimp on the epilogue, and unfortunately, this is one of them. And, you know, it is a bit light, as I mentioned, on the, like, retaliation and the cast of characters, because they're all kind of so separate. You've really only got the Cloud Giant King that you're working with, and then there's just the one villain that you're against. You know, there's not a whole lot of opportunity, for example, for making like allies along the way, or, you know, the Raziel doesn't have his own villains. He's not really doing anything in the world. So on the one hand, there's not really an epilogue, but there's also not really much of an opportunity for an epilogue, because there's not really much going on in the world that you would necessarily affect having done all this. So I'm not sure really what I was looking for, but certainly more than just a single paragraph that's like, good job, you defeated the blue dragon, everybody. All right, I think that goes over my recap and examination. You can see there's some unique stat blocks along the way. Most of these can be found in other 5e adventures, such as Tomb of Annihilation and Tyranny of Dragons. I think there's a couple that are unique, perhaps, but most of them can be found in other stat blocks, but it's still very, very nice to see it. Basically, if they don't appear in the monster manual, you can find them in here, which is hugely helpful, and I do appreciate that. Briefly, we do get some a few feats and a few sub-races based on the native folks to the actual Anarch region, if you wanted to play somebody from there, but nothing too extensive there. Alright, let's go over my pros and cons for Dragon Relics. Pros, professional layout and editing, no question. This is very, very well designed. There's not a single typo, grammatical error, anything. Everything is very well written, and it looks really good in terms of where the art and the maps are and everything. Pros, it successfully implements themes and mechanics from official 5e campaigns. And by that I mean, like, it uses the hex crawl mechanics from Tomb of Annihilation. It uses the chase mechanics from Out of the Abyss. It uses kind of the regional note, you know, here's the areas of interest thing from Storm King's Thunder. It uses a lot of those ideas from official 5e campaigns that all seem to work pretty well. You can choose to use them or not, but they're all implemented in here. So you can tell the designer is very well versed in all the official 5e adventures. Pro, a satisfying variety of styles in each chapter, from a desert hex crawl to a murder mystery to exploring a dinosaur-filled underground jungle. That's probably the biggest strength of this campaign, is just how varied and how many different kind of themes and styles that it offers throughout each chapter. You'd think it would be so disparate with how different all of those are, but I think it actually blends together very well, especially since, you know, it's essentially is a glorified fetch quest, but each one is at least, it's not like each one is in a dungeon that you have to go through and crawl in. Like, you know, one of them's in an auction house with a murder mystery, and one of them's just lying in a ice ship with a couple of bad guys on there that you can stealth in there and grab. One of them's in this giant heist thing. It's all of that gives you a lot of different varieties of ways to go about it. Pros, extensive details on all traps, including complications and countermeasures. I really like the way the traps are explained for the DM and also presented for the players. They really feel like they're well thought out and interesting, almost like puzzles in that way. Pros, interesting and satisfying multi-stage finale. I did like the way the final boss fight actually plays out. Pros, the Anarch Gazetteer provides over 40 noteworthy areas and over 30 encounters, very richly fleshing out this entire region. So if you wanted to engage with the hex crawl, or at least have some encounters prepped and ready to go, you definitely can. or if you wanted to expand on some of these areas, and if players, maybe they don't see the time constraint much in terms of a blue dragon running around, so you can kind of pop off to some of these more interesting areas. And pro full color grid maps for all major dungeon locations. Huge thank you for that. Appreciate it immensely. Cons. It's lacking in low-level content, which is mainly levels 1 through 3. I mean, level 1 and 2 is almost nothing. There's just very short, and you're only there for maybe a session or two for each of those. And then level 3 is just the random encounter hex crawl, which also, as somebody who played through Tomb of Annihilation, hex crawls can be fun, but I think also sparingly, and it just feels like you're going through those low levels so quick, and there's not really anything interesting happening in terms of the, traditional dungeon crawl is usually what I use, but that doesn't happen until level 4, which feels pretty late in their career already. Cons, no epilogue. I'm not sure, just was no attention paid there. There's not really a lot of it. This kind of bleeds into my second con, actually, which is there's very little villain interaction until the end. So there's no epilogue because there's also not a whole lot that the villain actually does. The villain doesn't have like this grand evil plan that the heroes are thwarting, for example. He just exists. And he's an ancient blue dragon, and he's up to no good in terms of he's just back and ready to wreak havoc, and he's going to start destroying the giants and everybody else. But it's just kind of a generic threat that the players have to face. And I wish he would have had either a more specific plan, or at least you would have been able to see his destruction a little more upfront and personable throughout the campaign, and would have made an epilogue maybe a little bit more interesting, and then solved that other con of very little villain interaction. Final verdict. With such an incredible amount of styles, themes, and gameplay mechanics, Dragon Relics successfully combines several of the designer's previously released adventures into one of the best DMs Guild releases of 2020. Thank you for everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. You can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.